Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Dungeon Dive, we are taking a look at Gascony's Legacy. Yes, another legacy game from Linvander Studios. So we have taken a look on the channel so far at the Red Sonja, the Hyrcania's Legacy, which is a game that I somewhat enjoyed. It's okay for a simple little adventure game. We then took a very long and detailed look at Albion's Legacy, and a more advanced adventure game set in the King Arthur mythos, the King Arthur legend. And that game skyrocketed to maybe one of my top 10 games of all time. It's up there. I love Albion's Legacy. And so I wanted to continue taking a look at the Linvander Studios games with Gascony's Legacy. And Gascony's Legacy is not really an adventure game. It is a tactical skirmish / board game. And I think it's pretty cool. Now, I got everything that you're going to see in today's video: the base game, the two main story expansions, the Man in the Iron Mask and the Count of Monte Cristo. So this is set in the fiction of Dumas, and focusing on the Three Musketeers. That's the theme of this game. But I got the base game, the two kind of story expansions, and the 3D terrain expansion, all for about $50, including shipping from eBay. And as of the day I'm filming this, which is October 1st, I think, I have seen copies on eBay for that same price. I've seen the base game go for as low as something like $20. And I think at the prices that this game is commanding right now, I think it's a worthwhile investment, because this game is a lot of fun. It's simple. There's not a lot to it as far as longevity. This isn't going to be a lifestyle game that you're going to devote many, many hours and months of your life playing. But if you want a really cool, kind of quick playing and fun tactical skirmish game with some good tactical decisions to make, I think that Gascony's Legacy would be a game for you. Now let's take a look at the back of the box here. So we have: the 17th century is an age of enlightenment and renaissance. For some, it's an age of chivalry, but for others, it's an age of corruption. France is in danger of becoming despoiled by both greed and tyranny. Her only hope lies in the King's Musketeers. Gascony's Legacy is a cooperative tactical battle and adventure game for 1 to 4 players. Each player controls one of the legendary members of the Musketeer Corps and their allies on a swashbuckling adventure against the Cardinal's forces. Fight your way through a 4-story campaign based on the novel by Alexandre Dumas to foil the Cardinal's plans before he takes control of France and sends it into darkness forever. All for one and one for all. So it says this is a 4-story arc, a 4-act campaign. That's kind of true, but each of the acts, each of the stories can easily just be played as a standalone scenario. You don't need to play them in any kind of order to create a long campaign. As a matter of fact, at the beginning of each act, your characters do kind of reset. And so there isn't really a campaign feel to it. So I look at it more as a skirmish game that you can set up and play one adventure, and then you can just skip to another adventure if you want to continue playing. On the table right now, I have the 3rd act, the 3rd scenario set up, and each scenario will have a number of different story cards associated with that scenario. The base game comes with 4 different scenarios, so you will have cards 11 through 40 something, 48. These are all the cards, all the scenario cards you will get in your base game. And again, you can play these in order, or you can just play one set at a time. Right now, I am playing through set 3, so act 3. And then the Man in the Iron Mask and the Count of Monte Cristo, each one of those comes with 3 different scenarios that you can play as well. And again, you can play those in order, or you can play them as standalone scenarios, just as one shot or one-off little skirmish games. So these scenarios here will have, on one side, you will have a little story that sets up the scenario, and then it tells you your objective. And then on the other side, if it is a battle scenario, it will show you how to set up your map, where your musketeers, where your band of adventurers, where they start, where they are trying to go. If this is a scenario that has an exit-based objective, or if you have to defeat all of the enemies. A lot of times on these, you will have choices that you make that will lead to different cards. So each time you play through a scenario, you won't see all of the adventures, you won't see all of the cards, you will make choices and you will skip over cards. There are also some story cards that are events, and these are little stories that you read, and then you will make a choice, and depending on what you do, you will go to another card. So while there might be, let's see how many, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards, 8 story cards in scenario 3. Maybe on one time through, you might see 4 of those different cards. So there is some replay ability, some replay value in each one of the scenarios. But let's read the story card for story number 1 here, which I am on. So this says, if there are any kind of hard to pronounce French words, please please pardon my poor French. But at last the musketeers are in London, but D'Artagnan needs to find the Duke of Buckingham. Luckily, the Duke is having a party. If they don't draw too much attention, they may be able to convince the Duke to give up the jewels. So we have special rules. So we're looking for, basically we're trying to find which one of these exits is the exit for this scenario. So we have everything set up now. I believe this is about the beginning of my second or third turn. The musketeers here, we started down here, and we are trying to find which of the 2 exits is the right exit that we need to win this scenario. And to do so on the map here, we have these search tokens. And depending on where the letter A is, that determines which exit I need to get to in order to win this scenario. So I have searched this token here and I found the letter B. So I did not learn any clues. I did not gain any information in that reconnaissance. So now I have these 2 search tokens up here. I'm looking for somebody who can tell me which exit to take, all while trying to battle these guards and escape with my life. And then once I get to the exit, then I have to make a choice. I can either, after exiting the right exit, I can choose to speak to a hand, to speak to one of the servants. And if I do that, I go to card 32, or I can eavesdrop on a gossiping servant to maybe learn a clue. If I do that, I go to card 33. So there are some branching paths in this scenario. So when you create a character, or when you pick a character you're going to play, we'll take a look at Constance here as an example. Each of the characters has a certain number of destiny tokens. Like all of Linvander's legacy games, they all use these destiny tokens. And usually these are just ways that you can mitigate luck. You can spend these to re-roll dice. Each of the characters will have a combat value and a movement value. So these are stats for combat and stats for movement. Sometimes those are used to generate dice pools, which you will roll d6 dice. Or you will roll d6s, and you will look for 4s, 5s, or 6s as successes. Usually 4s and 5s will count as 1 success, and 6s will count as 2 successes. Sometimes a 3 might count as a single success, and if you're at a disadvantage, then sometimes a 4 will not count as a success. So this is a dice pool based system. Sometimes you will, the movement score, you can move that many squares, and movement is very detailed. It's very tactical. You cannot change facing while you are moving unless you spend a point of movement, and facing does matter in this game. You know, in a lot of these kind of dungeon crawl games with tactical combat, and they have minis, I often lament the fact that the minis don't really matter because usually facing in these kinds of games doesn't matter. But in Gascony's Legacy, facing is super, super important. And so this might have been a game where minis would have been very useful. But the standees that the game comes with, those work really well, especially because they have these facing tokens that you slide on the standee, and those dictate which direction your character is facing. And they always have to be facing in an orthogonal direction. And then those also dictate which weapon you can use in your offhand or your main hand. And depending on the weapon that you are using, they will have certain squares that they can attack in. They will have certain squares that they can interact with because there are arcs, there are attack arcs and defense arcs in this game. So as Constance, if she is facing in this direction here, facing north, and she has her side sword and she has her stance token set to the side sword being in her right hand, she can attack in any of those red squares. As an action, you can also flip your stance token to the other side, and then that would actually move that weapon to her left hand, and now she could attack in those squares. So you really do have to think about how you are equipping your weapons and what kind of attack arcs they have. There's a whole bunch of different equipment, and a lot of the weapons will have different attack arcs. So it's really cool. I love this idea. Some weapons will be two-handed weapons. Some will be one-handed weapons. So as you can see, this pike allows you to hit in two squares directly in front of you. A small sword, you can do a swipe in front of you and then to the left or to the right, depending on which hand you have it in. A stiletto, a little small dagger, can only do one attack straight directly ahead of you. And then each one of the weapons will also have some kind of other bonus. For instance, this pike will allow you to add one additional attack die when you are using that pike. This small sword, after attacking, you may immediately change your facing and or stance. That's super cool. That's very handy because movement is a strict commodity. It's a resource that you need to be very careful about how you use in this game. Two-handed flail. The flail is pretty great. You can have an attack arc of the 3 squares directly in front of you, and then it can also extend to 1 square ahead of you. And enemies do not react when they get attacked by this weapon. So it kind of stuns them, because the enemy reaction deck is another way that makes this game really, really fun on a tactical level. Every time you hit an enemy and you don't kill the enemy, they get to draw one of these reaction cards, and you never know how the enemies are going to react to what you are doing, and it keeps you on your toes at all times. So the enemies can do things like they can have a bad dodge where they fail their dodge, and so they will take a wound. They can get revenge. They can entangle with you. They can do a counterattack. They can slip around you. They can call for help, stagger, they can duck, they can have fast hands, an eye for an eye, a shove, another entangle, an off balance, a thwart, a feint, a counterattack, a dodge, and then another bad dodge. So there are a lot of options in this reaction deck. And the combat in this game ends up being a really cool kind of choreographed dance, like in a really cool action movie. You are kind of constantly moving around the battlefield, pushing, pulling, moving around, changing your stance, changing your weapons, changing your facing. And it has one of the most interesting combat systems in any game like this that I have seen. So in my last turn, I just kicked over this flaming brazier, and I kicked it over on top of this Cardinals captain. This is kind of an elite enemy that was out on the board. I kicked it over and it fell on him, instantly killing that captain. So that is super cool. That is a way that you can interact with some of the terrain. The tables here, you can jump on top of the tables and you can get advantage with melee attacks. But in doing so, you also draw attention for ranged attacks against you. There are treasure chests that you can interact with to find treasure. There are pillars that block line of sight for ranged weapons. There will be stacks of boxes, of crates that act like terrain that you can stand on top of to gain elevation. There are wagons. You might have to push wagons, and other people can jump in the wagon to take a ride. There is a portcullis that can block a way. There are haystacks that you can hide in order to gain defensive bonuses. There are shrubberies and trees and statues and all kinds of really cool terrain to interact with. And the terrain on the board really, really does matter. It makes a difference. And you need to think about how you are utilizing your terrain. For instance, here in this map here, we have stairs, and this is the top and this is the bottom. And then to show the difference in elevation between these two spaces, you place this, which is an edge. And so we now know that there is an edge, kind of like a balcony here. So this is above this, and that shows that that is the top and that is the bottom. It's really thoughtful, and it does a lot with a little. Now, if you don't get the 3D terrain package, all of this terrain also has 2D counterparts and overlays. So you don't need the 3D terrain at all. It doesn't really add anything but a kind of visual presence to the game. So in my game right now, I am playing as D'Artagnan and Aramis. And each one of the characters, in addition to having their destiny and their attack value and their movement value, will also have a special talent and a special support. And you can use those by spending the stones of destiny. So all of these legacy games have stones of destiny, and there are these dice that Lanvander has made these symbols for. And at the beginning of each round, you are going to roll a stone of destiny, one stone of destiny for each of the characters in play. And then that becomes a pool of dice that you can spend on your turn to do certain things. And any of the characters can spend any of those dice on their turn to do certain things. For movement, you can spend one of those to do a +1 to your movement or a free prepare action. And prepare is when you change your stance or change your weapons. You can spend the axes to roll an extra die when attacking or attack with a second weapon. So if you have an offhand weapon and a main hand weapon, you can spend one of those stones in order to take 2 attacks. For one of the courage symbols, these lion head symbols, you can remove a status banner or regain a destiny. There are 2 different negative statuses that you can gain throughout this game, and that is Doom and Despair. And those end up covering up your character's special abilities. And in order to use that special ability, if it was covered up by a negative effect, you would have to spend that Stone of Chance. So you can either you can use your character's talent, you can use your character's support ability, or the wild card. You can use any result, or you can heal 1 wound. The way that wounds work in this game is most of the characters will start with 4 HP. As they take damage, they will go down and you will flip those over. Whenever you get all 4 flipped over, you remove 1 as kind of a grievous wound, as a hard wound, as a deadly wound. And then if another character is still alive, they can come over and help you up. And then you would flip the rest of your tokens over if you could heal. And then you would be in the rest of the story, in the rest of the campaign, or in the chapter or the act, you would only have 3 hit points and so on. You can never get back any of your grievously wounded hit points. So those are basically the characters. So again, I'm playing as D'Artagnan and Aramis. And right now it is the enemy's turn. And the enemies are all represented by simple tokens. The enemies don't have facing, so you don't ever need to worry about the enemies as far as keeping track of which way they're facing or anything like that. The enemies are kind of simplified, and I think that is a good choice because it keeps the game it keeps the game moving. You don't have to think too much about how the enemies will act. So there are a number of different enemies. Some are ranged and most are melee. So we have these Cardinals marksmen. Those are the ranged enemies. We have the Cardinals pikemen. Those are melee enemies, very dangerous melee enemies there. They have a huge attack arc. We have the Cardinals gunners. Those are ranged. The expert swordsman, the conspirator, and the Cardinals deacon. So those are all of the different enemies, and they will have different stats like how much damage they do, what their movement value is, and then how many successes it takes to wound an enemy, and then how many successes it takes to kill an enemy. An enemy can be killed outright by getting 3 successes, or they can be wounded by getting 2, and then an enemy, once they are wounded, you would flip it over to the wounded side, and then if they are ever wounded again, then they are killed. Very simple system, and I do enjoy it. You don't need to keep track of a lot of hit points or keep track of a lot of details for the enemies. There are also named enemies, and these are kind of the bosses that you will be facing depending on which scenario you are playing. So we have Cardinal Richelieu. There we have Milady de Winter, and we have Comte de Roquefort. And each one of these named enemies comes with their own deck of action and reaction cards. So when it's a named enemy's turn, you flip one of these over and it tells you what they do. And then as a reaction, when you attack them and they get to react, then you will draw another card over and that tells you how they react. So pretty cool. The enemies in this game, I think, are handled really well. I like the simplicity, but they're also deadly. And you can get into a lot of trouble really, really quickly. So right now it is the enemy's turn on this game here that I am playing. And all the enemies move and then they attack. And they want to move to get into, to be adjacent to one of your heroes so that they can attack. And they also want to try to be out of your attack arc. Because if they attack from your attack arc, then you get a chance to defend and try to mitigate some of the damage coming at you. So right now we have the Cardinal's Guard. Those are the only enemies on the board right now. And there are 3 of them. One of them is behind this pillar here. And so we would move to get those into position. And you move by the priorities here. So move the fewest numbers of squares towards the nearest character, then attacks one adjacent character. Okay, so this enemy here is already out of D'Artagnan's attack arc because D'Artagnan's attack arc is like this. The square directly in front and the 2 to his right there. Okay, so he's good. He'll stay there. This character here can move up to 4, so he will move 1, 2, 3. So that way that both of these characters, both of these guards can now attack D'Artagnan, and they are both out of his attack range. And then this guard here will move 2 there because to move diagonal, it counts as 2. And he is now out of Aramis's arc because Aramis can move or can attack directly in front, to the right, and to the left with his Spada de Lato. So let's see, D'Artagnan is going to take 2 points of damage, and D'Artagnan cannot defend. If one of these enemies was in D'Artagnan's attack arc, then you could roll your movement dice and you could look for 4, 5s, or 6s in order to mitigate damage. And then Aramis will also take a point of damage for being attacked by this guard. So then now it would be the hero's turns. And on a turn, you can do the following. You can move up to your movement rating. Then you can perform 1 action and then you can make an attack. The actions, you can interact with the terrain. You can prepare, flip your stance or change your equipment. You can trade cards with an adjacent ally. You can rescue. You can help a fallen ally. Or you can search if you're looking for some of that reconnaissance, some of that information. And then you can make 1 melee attack. And so right now we need to search for the letter A so we can figure out which exit we need to go to. So we need to make our way towards one of those search tokens. And there are only 3 enemies out on the board. However, one of the reactions that an enemy can have is to call for reinforcements. So that's always an option. That's always a threat that you have, is you may have 1 enemy left and you think, okay, we can clear the board and then we can take our time. But hey, they may call for reinforcements. You never know. So actually, this enemy here is actually in D'Artagnan's attack arc now. So he could stay there and attack that enemy. Or we could move and have him attack this enemy, or we could move there and have him attack this enemy. I don't see any way right now for us to be able to attack more than 1 enemy in D'Artagnan's attack arc. So let's actually have D'Artagnan move up 1 here, and he will attack this enemy here in that attack arc, just as an example of an attack. So we have an attack value of 4 for D'Artagnan. So I will take 4 dice and I'm looking for 4, 5s, or 6s. And I have a 6 and a 4. So that would be 1 success and 2 successes. That's 3 successes. And if I get 3 successes, I automatically kill the enemy, taking him off the board. When you kill an enemy with a melee attack, then you get to draw a loot card. And the loot cards are usually kind of little healing items, sometimes some money you can find because there's a way to shop in between scenarios or in between story cards. You can shop for new equipment. You might find a cross. The cross allows you to gain a discarded destiny token back. Sometimes you find nothing, junk, and sometimes you might find a broken sword, which is basically junk or nothing. And sometimes you do find some healing items. And it looks like the top of this deck here right now was the junk. So I found a broken sword on the Cardinal's body and the guard, and I get nothing. Okay, so that would be D'Artagnan's turn. Now it's Aramis's turn. He can move 1 over, keeping his facing going forward. And then he could use his Spada de Lato in order to attack that guard in front of him. His attack value is 3, so I would roll 3d6. and there's 2 successes. So 2 successes is enough to wound the guard but not kill the guard. So I would flip him over to the wounded side and so on. And then it would be another enemy's turn to attack and so on. Again, you can move on top of these tables to get advantage. You can kick over these flame pits. You can roll barrels in a straight line if there are any barrels. You can interact with these treasure chests here to draw equipment cards and get new gear. There's a whole bunch of different weapons. We've seen some of them. There are ranged weapons as well, and ranged weapons will have a huge arc that you can use that ranged weapon in with a number of squares that you can attack in. Now, with melee weapons, you can attack all enemies within your arc. With ranged weapons, you have to pick one enemy within that attack arc. There are also defensive weapons, so you can have bucklers and shields in order to help defend yourself. So yeah, all in all, this game is pretty cool. There's a lot going on. There are really cool tactical decisions to be made. Facing matters. It matters which weapons you have in which hand. The different attack arcs for the weapons are really cool. You have to think about it in a kind of a puzzly way, but it's also super fun because of just the way that you can interact with the enemies, the way you can interact with the terrain, and just all the different choices you have make it feel like more than a puzzle. And because things are constantly moving around on the board, the combat feels dynamic. And that's something that I think is missing in a lot of games that have this kind of tactical combat. The combat rarely feels dynamic. And that's something that I've talked about a lot in a lot of these kinds of games, games like Warhammer Quest, games that I love. The combat usually ends up being something like this. You move to a square, the enemy moves to a square, and then both of you are only just rolling dice to see who can kill each other first. And there isn't a lot of positioning. There isn't a lot of push and pull. The combat doesn't feel dynamic. It doesn't feel like a dance. It doesn't feel like things with interesting things going on the board. In this game, it does because of the way that the enemies might react. So because of this, we should have drawn a reaction card because Aramis only wounded this enemy. So let's see what he would have done. I should have done that before. That enemy would have slipped. So if the enemy is adjacent to you, it moves one spot clockwise around you if possible. If it is now outside your attack pattern, take a wound. So that enemy would have moved like this. Actually, this column here might have prevented him, but if that column wasn't there, he would have moved here. He would have slipped to this square here, thus now being outside of Aramis's attack pattern, and then Aramis would have taken a wound. That's a really cool reaction, and that kind of reaction doesn't happen in a lot of games that have this kind of combat. And so that is something that I really do like. I think the combat is interesting and fun in this game. It's a good thing because it's pretty much 100% the focus of the game. So let's see what would have happened. Let's say I found the exit and now I can either choose to speak or eavesdrop. I'm going to eavesdrop, so I'm going to go to card 33 here. So the gossiping servant. Servant notices D'Artagnan snooping around and comes over to investigate with the proper incentive. He agrees to say nothing of what he's seen. He claims the Duke is currently making his rounds, checking on the supplies of food and wine. Let's see what happens here. Each player draws a loot card. Players may pay 1 coin to increase the stealth track by 1 any number of times. So some of these scenarios will use different tracks here to keep different tracks here to keep track of certain things. So you might have different rounds, wagon damage or stealth, danglers and poison vial, and then Felipe and under siege. So I forgot to put out the when I was setting this up for the video, I forgot to put out the stealth track here. So the stealth track, you will keep track of how stealthy you are in this scenario, and you will usually use one of these cards here to keep track of things. And depending on what happens during the scenario, you want to keep these tracks at a certain value. And now to search the lower levels, we would go to 36, or to search the pantry, we would go to 37. So let's say we go to 36 to look. And now we are in the lower levels, and then the lower levels is another battle. And so then we would set up another map and have another battle. So yeah, overall, this game is a lot of fun. If you like combat, if you like tactical combat, if you like skirmish games, and you want that in kind of in a more of a board game form where you don't need to think about point values and having large armies, then yeah, this game is great, especially because you can get it for so cheap. Even the base game comes with a lot of stuff for fun, and I think it's worth, you can find it for $20 or something. I'd say pick it up. Again, you can usually find everything with all of the expansions and the 3D terrain for about $50. And that is a steal, I think, for the amount of fun that this game offers. And every time I set this game up, I just have fun. It looks cool. There are interesting scenarios. The combat is interesting. It's fun getting new gear to figure out how you're going to work those attack patterns into your facing and your tactical decisions. The rolling the dice is fun. Having these all for one, these stones of chance that you can use as kind of a group power is fun. The different enemies are really easy to control, and I love this reaction deck because you never really know what's going to happen, and it adds a lot of chaos and a lot of cool choreography on the battlefield. So, all right, you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at Gascony's Legacy. Hey, another game from Linvander Studios that I really like. Pretty soon we will be taking a look at the Buffy the Vampire Slayer board game to see if that is yet another Linvander Studios game that I enjoy here on the Dungeon Dive. So, all right, you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.